Adrian, did you know that boxing isn't the real name of the sport?
I did not.
It's actually called pugilism, which
Is that
is
true?
yeah. I just looked that up, which is like it's the art of hand to hand fighting. I don't know if you ever played
Pugilism.
like the old like Fallout games, but there'd be like magazines you could collect that help you with your like hand to hand fighting, and they're called Pugilism Illustrated or something like that.
I guess I just never put that together.
I think it's just because it has ism on the end. People don't want to. Why are you disrespecting pugils? Anyhow, welcome back to the Drive Back Podcast. My name is Garrett,
And I'm Adrian.
and today we've got the return of first timers, which is what, Adrian?
Where neither Garrett nor I have seen the movie, so we give it a first time viewing here on the podcast.
That is absolutely right. And today's film, if you haven't guessed already, is about boxing. But we're not watching any of the Rocky movies. We're not watching any of the Creed ones, not Southpaw, nothing like that. We are watching The Fighter, which is also a phone a friend recommendation from friend of the show. I forgot the name because I didn't look at it. From Mitch. So thank you, Mitch, for selecting this for us.
Thanks,
Let's
Mitch.
go ahead and dive right into The Fighter. Released in 2010, it was directed by David O. Russell and stars Mark Wahlberg, Christian Bale, and Amy Adams. Based on the story of Mickey Ward, a fledgling boxer who tries to escape the shadow of his more famous but troubled older boxing brother and get his own shot at greatness. It was nominated for 5 Oscars, including Best Original Screenplay, Best Film Editing, Best Director, Best Supporting Actress for Amy Adams, and Best Picture. It did win 2 Academy Awards, one for Best Supporting Actor for Christian Bale, and Best Supporting Actress for Melissa Leo. So, real quick, this is your first time seeing the movie, my first time seeing the movie. Adrian, what were your spoiler-free thoughts?
I really liked it. I thought it was really good. I've always been a fan of movies like these. Like you mentioned Southpaw, but another one that I really like is Warrior. I'm just a big fan of these kind of like come-ups boxing movies and fighting movies in general. I think they're really inspirational. I'm always a fan of the underdog, so I really like this movie.
Gotcha. I am typically not a fan of these kinds of movies. Not because it's not inspirational, not because I'm not into boxing, but because, you have these underdog tales and they're very predictable to me. You know that they're going to come out on top. Like, that's just how the movies work. It would have been a lot more interesting to see him lose, like the original Rocky. Like, Rocky lost, but he became the people's champion. Also, like Real Steel that we covered a couple months, almost last year, I think. Maybe it was earlier this year. But that being said, this movie is still good. I want to preface that. I'm not saying I didn't like the movie. I'm just saying I don't like this type of movie, typically. But for me, it's all about the performances in this movie. This is a performance piece. This is a performance vehicle. And without saying too much more, that's a spoiler. I think that's kind of the best thing I can say about the movie. So, if you don't have anything else spoiler-free to talk about, we'll go ahead and drop the spoiler warning for The Fighter. It was available to watch on Netflix until today, which is September 1st.
It's on Prime now.
It is on Prime, okay, and I believe it was also on something else. Let me double-check real quick, because it was on like 3 different services. It's on Prime Video and Paramount Plus. So if you have either one of those, it is available on those. So, spoiler warning out of the way. For those who did not see The Fighter, turn away now, but we still want your views, so maybe stick around. Or listens or downloads, however it works. But let's go ahead and dive more into spoilers. So obviously, you're into boxing movies like this, it sounds like. How does this stack up to movies like Creed or Rocky, like some of like A Raging Bull, like some of the classics? How do you think it stands up?
Well, it's tough. I don't want to spoil anything about Rocky, but I find the latter Rocky movies to be a little more interesting because, again, it deals with kind of like how do you recover from a loss like that and that kind of thing. So, and I really liked the first Creed. Second Creed was good also. I don't know. I kind of associate them all with the same place in my head of like I really like them for like I'll watch them, and I'm a really big fan of them. I'll talk them up, and then they kind of just fall away from my memory. Like I can still talk about them, but they kind of fall away from like my frontal cortex or whatever. But I think this one definitely is near the top. I think it's probably better than Warrior from my memory. But yeah, I think it's really, really good. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I've got to be honest, this is my first boxing movie. that I've ever seen. And I think I've made this kind of clear on the show before. I'm not the biggest fan of sports movies, just because I'm not the biggest fan of sports. I think they're kind of pointless. But every once in a while there is a sports movie that comes along and just completely shatters my expectations. The biggest one, I think we talked about this last night, the biggest one that I still love watching is Moneyball. And I don't even really care about baseball. So it's like, it has to do something really special. And for this one, like I said in my spoiler-free thoughts, it's the performances. Christian Bale melts into his character in this movie. I didn't see Christian Bale.
Yeah.
I did not see him. Melissa Leo, I don't know if this is the first movie that I've seen her in. Like, off the top of my head, I can't remember. But she disappears into her character, as unlikable as she is in this movie. Which, to be fair, everyone in this movie, save for Mark Wahlberg, and I guess most of Amy Adams, is pretty unlikable.
I think that's the point.
But like,
he comes from a household of unlikable.
Yeah, which is funny because usually Mark Wahlberg is the most unlikable person in any movie he's in. And I would say, I hate to dig on Mark Wahlberg. He's not that bad of a guy.
I'm just leaving you alone with that one.
Hey, I'm gonna die on that hill apparently. But I feel like usually I'm not too big a fan of Mark Wahlberg's performances. I think he's pretty just the same in everything. This one though, I feel like his personality. I feel like because he's from Boston, I believe, so I think he melts into the character better here. Like it fits more like something that Mark Wahlberg. It kind of goes beyond him a little bit. I'm not saying his performance was incredible, but at least it kind of felt more in line with what he could do more comfortably. I would say. I would like Sully from Uncharted probably wasn't the best casting decision for him, but. I digress. Still, Christian Bale and Melissa Leo, there's my camera, are probably the best two performances in this movie. Amy Adams is also very good as well. Didn't know she could do a Boston accent. Did I know that?
Yeah, I guess not.
Yeah, I mean, she makes the accent sound pretty nice, I gotta admit. Usually it's just like, dumpster fire in my ears, but now she made it sound great.
You're just roasting left and right. What's the
same thing happened with Good Will Hunting. Maybe it's just Boston I'm not a fan of. I don't know why. I've never been there. I've got nothing against Boston, but it's like all their movies and characters I just can't get along with. But I do want to talk about something though, and we kind of touched on this last night, is that I always had the perception, like, again, first time seeing this movie, I always had the perception that this was one of those movies that was purely made for awards attention. Like, there's several movies like this that you don't, like, they always get all this award buzz and talk, and then they disappear. You never hear about them again. Like, when people are talking about the best films of all time, they don't talk about The King's Speech. They don't talk about The Fighter. We still talk about, Well,
I still talk about The King's Speech a lot.
Really?
Yeah, I'm fascinated with that movie because Colin Firth, right? He went to such lengths to learn the stutter for that movie that he actually never was able to get rid of it. He still has it to this day because the speech therapy totally overrode his brain. So I just find that movie really interesting because of the dedication to it. So.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen it. We should probably do a rewatchables for that one, just to get some coverage on it. But, a lot of those movies, though, I feel like they just become bland and forgettable because they're just made to get that hype at the end of the year. They release in a couple of cities. They get the attention. They releases into wider theaters, so it makes more money because they get the attention on them. They get a couple of golden statues, and then they just move on. So, that was always the perception I had of this movie. And like the Grand Budapest Hotel, I need to eat a little bit of my shorts. Because Grand Budapest Hotel, turns out, it's a great fucking movie. This one, I wouldn't say is nearly at the same level as Grand Budapest Hotel, personally. But it's still very good. But there's that little thing in the back of my head that's always just kind of yeah, it's got really good performances, but the story is a little bit more formulaic. It's that typical underdog story, so, why is this getting as much attention as it did? So,
I think it adds a lot more than just a standard underdog story, though. I think the whole side plot with his brother is super fascinating, and arguably not necessarily a supporting actor role. Arguably I mean, it's like a tandem movie. So yeah, you get the fighting, you get the underdog story of that, but there's also an underdog story going on with the brother, or at least an attempt at an underdog story
Yeah.
of trying to get life back on track and things like that. So while one is fighting to win this thing, the other one's fighting just to get out of situations. And actually, I think it's interesting because I don't know who the fighter is in this movie. I don't know who it's supposed to be. So I think it's way more than just the standard underdog story, which I think is why it works and why it won awards, because it adds a lot.
But I think when it comes to the underdog story, I'm specifically referring to Mark Wahlberg's character, who
Yeah.
is probably the more underwhelming of the two, and he's the one that gets the most focus. I would have rather seen the personal growth and journey of Dickie, his brother, played by Christian Bale, because again, his performance is magnetic. It is just incredible. So
Yeah.
I think just kind of getting too much of the underwhelming side mixed with this like incredible performance just kind of created a little bit of a friction for me personally.
Sure.
Now, again, not saying I don't like the movie. Maybe I'm being overly critical for the sake of trying to get a couple of views on this podcast episode. Who knows? But apparently hatred gets more views online than anything else. The amount of videos out there that are like why this movie sucks gets more views than why this movie's good. Okay, Garrett's soapbox rant is over for a second.
So you're skewing your review?
No, I'm not skewing the review. I'm just kind of skewing the verbiage about it. But let's dive in a little bit more. What else kind of made this movie stand out to you?
Yeah, like you said, Christian Bale's performance. I thought the fighting was good enough, but I actually found the big boxing scenes. But I actually found the training sections a lot more interesting because I feel like, again, not knowing who the fighter is, a lot happens in the training ring when there were like people come in and there's conversations, and there's a lot that happens where it's almost like the underdog story kind of seeps out into life in those moments where like he's physically training for this thing, working, trying to claw his way out or up, and then the people that are definitively supposed to be holding him back keep showing up. Like it's such a physical representation of that I found it super interesting, or like I guess a really interesting way to frame that, like bring that in. So I found those moments really, really cool.
Gotcha. I definitely think the training moments are more of the focus here, because I definitely feel like we don't get as much of the fights.
I was gonna ask if you were gonna bring up the same thing about the gladiator. Do you not feel like this should be called the fighter? Should it be called like the trainer?
No, because I mean the fighter goes well beyond fighting in the ring. There's a lot of other fights you can have in your life.
Absolutely.
You can't gladiate against a drug addiction. like that's I guess that's the present tense of gladiator.
Russell Crowe can.
Yeah, apparently Russell Crowe can. No, yeah, I agree. I think the training sessions are very important because that's where a lot of the friction happens, right? It's where so much happens with the family, so much happens with his girlfriend and his brother. But I do want to talk about my favorite moment of this movie, and that is when Christian Bale's character, this is a spoiler, so we already said spoiler alert, when he gets out of prison, and they go to the training session, and Amy Adams' character leaves, and he goes to get her back for his brother's sake. Love that moment. Love that scene.
It's him being bigger than himself and bigger than the situation and knowing that she's needed.
Exactly. Yeah. And just the way that ends, there's a little bit of that Wahlbergian humor.
Wahlbergian.
Yeah, I'm patenting it right now before he takes it. When he gets out of the car and she's like, "Hey, I got her back for you," and he's like, "Good, now go get O'Keefe."
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't get a lot of my name represented in any movie, so that kind of feels nice.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
It's spelt wrong. They have only one F, so they're not a true O'Keefe. But it is nice to hear it referenced in a movie.
Represented.
We're gonna hunt for a Quintana somewhere. If we find one.
I feel like I've seen a movie within the last 3 years that had a Quintana in it.
Well,
I can't remember it off the top of my head.
We'll have to find it and put it on the show.
Yeah.
But anything else you want to talk about with the fighter? I mean, this is kind of one of those cut and dry movies, right? It's got really good performances.
And if you've seen a boxing movie, then I don't want to say you've seen this one, but you've seen the genre, so you'll know if you'll like it or not. Like if you've seen any of those, it's the same story. It's somebody training to win a huge boxing match for their neighborhood or for their city. Like it's the same thing.
Yep.
But this movie does add a ton of different elements to it. It I think the fighting is a little iffy at times. I think like the choreography was really good, but I would agree that this is where Mark Wahlberg might fall a bit short. I don't know if he was like as good as I think like in Creed. Like the fighting is crazy, like it feels so real. This one felt a little bit like they're on a stage, and like I felt like I could kind of feel the camera and the direction going on. But I guess that'll be my final thoughts, and because of all that, I give this movie an 83.
An 83. That's honestly a little bit lower than I was expecting you to give. So, I mean, hey, we gotta do that. Also, we have a new segment we're gonna do after this, which Adrian knows because it's gonna be a lot of fun. But getting to my final thoughts first, I said, with its incredible performances and sense of realism, the film rises above its formulaic story and its awards-baity nature. With that, I did give the movie a 75. Still a good score. I'm happy that I watched it. It's not going to be something I watch again, though. I think I'm happy that I saw it. Not going to check it out again. Like, I would rather rewatch. I'm sure I would rather rewatch Rocky or Raging Bull or these other kind of definitive films as opposed to this one.
Yeah, sure.
But that's going to bring us to an end for the review. Now on to the game show. Mr. Adrian, it's time to guess that tomato meter. So, I am going to look up on Rotten Tomatoes the movie that we covered here today. And you are going to try and tell me what it got from both critics and from an audience score.
Okay.
So, Adrian, what do you think it got for a critic rating?
What? This movie?
Yes.
I thought you were going to give me a different movie.
No, The Fighter.
From a critic standpoint, I'm going to guess it got a 78.
A 78. For the critic score. You are low.
Okay.
Remember, Rotten Tomatoes is not a true average of the scores. It is how many people gave it a positive review. So
that's what I guessed, yes.
So, okay, gotcha. So I'm reminding the people at home that, because Rotten Tomatoes is not a typical review aggregator, so you are low. It is, in fact, a 91% from critics.
That's great to hear. I love when people love movies.
But what do you think the audience gave The Fighter?
I'm almost tempted to just lock it back in at 78, just because of the critic score being so high. And I know typically audience scores are higher, but I feel like that's already pretty high. And I feel like a lot of people might have had problems with like the view of drugs and prostitution and stuff. So I'm going to guess 85.
You are so close. The audience score is an 89%.
Oh, really close. Wow.
So it is very close. Right, one of the rare ones where the tomato meters seem to be pretty similar. Yeah. Usually the audience is wrong when it comes to a lot of these movies.
I wonder what the correlation on close tomato scores and Oscars is.
That would be an interesting science experiment.
Because what I'm thinking is if both critics and audiences really like this movie, the scores are super close and they're high. So I wonder if that is like all Oscar winners are like that. I wonder. Well,
I can already tell you it's not, because there's like Bohemian Rhapsody.
Oh yeah. Had
not as good critic reception, but it had really high audience reception, but still ended up getting a couple different awards.
Sure.
But for bonus points, Adrian, can you guess the Metacritic score? This is the true average of all review scores.
I will lock that in at 86.
You are a little high. It is at 79. So
I was gonna do 78 again. I should have just gone 78 for the whole thing. That's ridiculous.
Just say 75 with every single thing you say. Yeah, so it's at a 79 for a Metascore, kind of in between what we gave it. So I think it's going to be kind of fun to kind of look at the critic reception and the audience reception to kind of see where we were at.
Sure.
It's always kind of fun to look and see how audiences treat movies, because it's
definitely
no wonder why we get movies like Venom 2. Because audiences seem to really like that. But that's going to bring us to an end for this episode. Next week, we have the return of Show and Tell. Adrian has selected probably the first horror movie in a decent while here on the podcast. He has selected The Exorcism of Emily Rose.
One of my favorites.
Which, well, spoiler alert for how you feel on the movie. Maybe the opinion's changed. We don't know. But maybe, I don't know how long it's been since you've seen the movie. It is streaming on Paramount Plus, though. So if anyone out there wants to watch it, it is on Paramount Plus, or you can obviously rent the film. And then I have selected, actually, our first Coen Brothers movie on the podcast, as far as I know, which is Hail Caesar, which is available to stream on Netflix. So
Good old George Clooney.
good old George Clooney, Channing Tatum, Joni Hill, I was going to say Jonah Hex, but it's Josh Brolin.
Joni Hill, you must really know him closely.
Oh, yeah, me and Joni go way back. I remember when he was... a little lad.
I remember when he was Jonah. Now he's Joni.
I remember when he was Jonah Rise. Now he's Jonah Hill, and I can't wait for him to hit Jonah Mountain. But that's gonna be it. Adrian, if anyone wants to follow us online anywhere, where can they do that?
The Drive Back Podcast, wherever you find your podcast, wherever you find your YouTube videos, and wherever you find yourself on the internet. The Drive Back Podcast, we're there. We post every Monday on all platforms, and YouTube gets a little bit extra sprinkled in there. So if you want any exclusive content, make sure to go ahead and subscribe over there and follow again every Monday. Haven't missed a single episode in X amount of time.
Almost 2 years.
Yeah.
So, but that's absolutely right. Make sure you follow us now. And you know, I feel it's also like we've done 116 episodes now. I always put our individual Instagrams underneath us. So if you want to follow us individually at the beginning of the show, it does say where those are. I know it's kind of hard on Spotify or Apple Music or anything, wherever you're listening to this. That's kind of hard to find out, but it is in our description of the show. So, but thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We love you so much. We'll see you next time here on The Drive Back. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Drive Back. Make sure to be on the lookout for new episodes every Monday, and make sure to follow us on social media.